So, welcome everyone to this, the fifth in our series of webinars, which is set up to address the hunger in the Scottish Islands to hear from experts based in other islands worldwide. And I'm really pleased to introduce to you today Professor Owe Ronström from Gotland. Owe has written extensively on music, dance, ethnicity, age, heritage, and islands. And he's also produced several hundred radio broadcasts for the Swedish Broadcasting Corporation on music from around the world. He's an active musician himself, and in June 2013, he produced BelleSounds, the world's largest concert. So Owe is going to talk about his research into islandness and the history, heritage, and music of Gotland, his island home. And if he disappears, it will be because Gotland has been enjoying a snowstorm recently. So welcome, Owe.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in this seminar or webinar. And I will first talk, in this talk, which will last about, say, 40 minutes or so, I hope. I start by reflecting a little bit over island studies, which is a field I have been active in during the last 15 to 20 years. And the second part is the story of an art or music project that I undertook almost 10 years ago, which at the same time was a scientific experiment with some key notions in island studies. And to end, I will reflect over what I learned and features of island life and island culture from that experiment. Let's just start with then. Island studies has grown, of course, a lot the last decades. It's now I see it as a discipline with three strands or phases. The first one is, of course, it's rather old. It's researching on islands, using islands as spots to investigate into biology, geology. Darwin are among those, and many others. So that's maybe the first, and it has become very important. And then there are studies about islands, about island life. And I come to think about Margaret Mead's Coming of Age of Samoa and many other anthropologists doing studies about islands and islands life. And the latest direction, I would say, is not on or about, but thinking with islands, studying the world or general ideas and think of from in a very general mode, but from an island perspective. And it's this last strand that has interested me, especially what general insights we can gain about things like center-periphery relations, about power, gender, not least time and age, remoteness, representations, narratives, language, and of course, music and arts. And island studies, as I see it today, is all this on, about, and with islands. And as you may know, islands today is coined as the study of islands on its own terms. This is a phrase coined by Grant McCall and Christian de Preter. They suggested islands on its own terms to be the definition of island studies. What would that be? To start with, on its own terms suggests that there are also other terms, or maybe others terms. And throughout centuries, even millennia, islands have been a favorite target for fantasies of all kinds, fantasies of hells, of paradises, and all kinds actually. And if many of these fantasies earlier were in one or the other way connected to religious beliefs or practices, I think today it's fairly clear to say that the most vivid fantasies are produced by tourist offices, film producers, social media, etc. So representations of islands in popular culture has many sides. We find them as paradises, repositories for the otherwise extinct. I come to think of Jurassic Park, a film I saw recently called Kong, which is very strange pictures where the islands play a decisive role, of course, and as quarantines and prisons, as places where life is slower, easier, low-key, where people know each other and where social control is high. Here I come to think about the series Shetland, for some reason, which is all this. But whatever these images show, a fair guess that it's not so much islands on its own terms as perhaps islands on some continental terms. Although research on islands is growing fast, it is still unclear what islands and islands are beyond these fantasies. So what I tried to do during a number of years is compile a list of the most common features of around the notion of the island in our part of the world. And what I found, I would like to share with you a list here. Start with that. Now let's see. Yes, and then I need to go back because this was, I can't, why can't I? Yeah, sorry, here we are. So this is the list. Now I'm ready. These are some of the features that what islandness is made from. To start with, an idea about a certain homogeneity, that the island is, the homogeneity is also something like stability, like continuity, a certain quality that comes with the island that makes it different from continents and mainlands. Also, of course, boundedness, which is part of very close connected to homogeneity. It's a stress on distinctiveness, on community, and sameness. It basically says that if bounded places, within bounded places, people tend to be more of the same or very similar. And then, of course, remoteness. And remoteness comes in different forms, not only in geographical terms like spatial remoteness. Spatial remoteness is always also temporal remoteness. To say that a place is remote, it means that it's sort of lagging behind also temporally and perhaps also culturally in some ways. And small scale, a tendency of diminution, tendencies to portray places like this as small, as a microcosm of its own. And also crucial to islands, ideas about islands is a certain sacrality. That I mean here, something like a magic place, some enchantment comes with the place, spirituality. People actually go to islands to find not only themselves, but to connect with the spiritual world. And that is not only in religious terms, but also in more like New Age terms, of course. It's a very common phenomenon, like in the Northern Hemisphere at least. And also islands come with a certain naturalness, some authenticity or originality is described to islands. And here is an important one also, because remoteness introduces not only a distance in space, but also distance in time. A certain archaism is ascribed to islands, a stress on the archaic or maybe conservative and backwardness. And of endemism comes with homogeneity and boundedness, is an idea that people on islands, or maybe also not only people, but things on islands are inbreeded, maybe it's endemic, that islands are independent, self-sufficient, they're isolated, and that's why they become endemic. Also people there. As you might know, Gotlanders are known to have an extra vertebra and also less teeth than other people in Swedes. And also double urine. I don't know the English word, but the leaders of urine that would lead the urine down to the loo. That we have two of them, they say, and also Ålanders and many other people. So this is a very common idea about islanders, actually. And important also the idea that islands constitute something of a tabula rasa or terra nullius, which means that a place where you can go there, but nothing happens there. It's a new start. You can do whatever because there's nobody there, and it's just to start all over. Of course, here Robinson Crusoe is the key idea here. Then the main character of this tabula rasa phenomenon. Now, if you look at this list and contemplate what it means, then island researcher Godfrey Baldacchino, he contends that islands today have become the object of what appears to be the most lavish and extensive global branding in human history. Islands, he writes, find themselves presented as locales of desire, as platforms of paradise, as habitual sites of fascination, emotional offloading, or religious pilgrimage, end quote. So such are the island fantasies of our time. While some of these features are new, of course, others are, and probably most of them have a very long history. But as anybody would guess, this list of features and the fantasies that comes with them is not necessarily the islanders' perspectives or views, but it's not necessarily very different either from islanders' perspectives. And there are two, I think, general and very important reasons for this. Here is one. What is called the Thomas Theorem, which actually says simply that what people tend to believe is real will have some real consequences, and then what people believe will become real through their consequences. That is, islands and islanders tend to become treated on par with whatever fantasies people take for real, and then they will have real consequences. The other is another theorem from culture studies and from social psychology that are, it's about identities and how that identities are relational. We tend to become those who we see reflected in the eyes of the others. And in case of islanders, of course, the first others are people from away, the mainlanders and people from other islands. And these people are so very many more than the islanders themselves. The islanders will, in one way or the other, come to reflect whatever fantasies are projected on them. That is, what is the tourist destination images is all about. So islanders tend to become what they see mirrored in the eyes of the others, and what people believe is real will have real consequences. So it might not be so far-fetched away that also islanders tend to embrace some of the fantasies that are brought up around them. And then you could ask, of course, what is terms anyway, on its own terms? If islanders would represent islands, it would still be representations in some form, images, symbols, narratives, ideas, smells, music, of course. And a question central to island studies is, of course, what constitutes an island? This question looks deceptively simple because it leads to geography, to those pieces of land surrounded by water. But take note that the typical answers of these questions are produced by the question itself. What is? What is? But what if we ask other types of questions? Actually, I think a better question might be, where is? Where is an island? While one type of answer position islands as objectively existing phenomena in the real world, another type would position islands as representations, as images, as a phenomenon of the mind. And this division runs through the recent 15, 20 years of island studies, this division between real island as a real object or as a representation of the mind. But then also yet another question is, when is an island? I think that is a really good question. When points towards islands as phenomena called upon in certain contexts, as a discursive device to induce certain forms of action or meaning. When thus leads to a situational relational approach, answer that relates where to a specific when. In such a perspective, reality is what becomes real through human action and human will. In other words, it leads to performances. Whatever objectively exists as reality only becomes objectively existing when performed. Island as something performed then in turn leads to the question, how? How islands are represented, framed, staged, produced. produced. And all this I was contemplating about all this while conducting a long-term research project on islands and islandness, starting with some islands on Gotland and other ones in the Baltic Sea. I thought that research is, in my view, a lot about listening to people, to nature, to materiality, to landscape. So does island have a voice? Does an island have a voice? What do actually islands sound like? I soon found that it can be difficult to hear the voices and sounds of islands and of islanders because there are so many other and much louder voices around from away. So I wondered, would it be possible to produce a really powerful sound? The idea was to somehow show that also small places can have big voices. That is, places that are designated as small and insignificant can also have something important to say. And then, as a musician, I was interested in the materiality of it all, so to say, not only in metaphorical terms. What would it be possible to have a whole island to perform as a musical instrument, and what would that sound like? So now, imagine a very large instrument, and then imagine to double it, and double it again and again. Now, think of a very large stage and double it again and again. Here we are. This is Gotland. This is the stage, all of the island. This is the island with now, this is an old figure. From last year, we count 60,000 because of the pandemic. People have moved here. Now, this is the stage, and think of the musical instruments that is put on this stage is all the church bells in Gotland. Gotland is one of the most church-dense places in the world. There are 100 medieval churches, and to that come a lot of other more modern churches, of course. Now, what I will do is to present the project to use all the bells, which are well over 200, to perform together as a musical instrument, which would actually be the world's largest instrument ever, and the world's largest orchestra pit ever, because the orchestra pit is the whole island. And here are some of the medieval churches, which are spread out evenly over the whole island, and they have from 1 to 3 or 4 bells each of them, weighing tons. So this instrument is really huge and heavy. This is what we are talking about, very old bells. So in June, the 8th of June, 2013 at 11 o'clock, all these bells performed what we call in English BelleSounds, a very large concert. It's a composition by prominent Swedish composers, broadcasted live by Swedish radio over Europe through the EBU, which is the European Broadcasting Union, and via internet to the rest of the world. And it aspires to be the world's hitherto largest live broadcast. It was made possible by new broadcasting technology developed for this project, and more than 100 ringers participated, and together with approximately 150 volunteers and a large staff of technicians. Why we did that? There were some goals around this, and I'll say some few words about why we did this, why I tried to do this. There are, of course, musical goals or aims to explore by means of church bell the sound of a very, very large space, the whole of island of Gotland. And of course, explore the social and cultural conditions for what can be perceived as a musical piece, a musical instrument, and by extension, the phenomenon that we call music, of course. What is music? This was what to be explored. And in culture politics, our aspirations evolved from the observation that the world's population is now rapidly converging to few very large megacities, where more and more economical and political power is concentrated, but which leaves parts of the world increasingly impoverished and marginalized. What I wanted to explore is how small and marginalized places like the island of Gotland can perform and take place in a bigger context with a large and powerful voice. And then I jumped to technical. The technical goal was to develop and test new technology for live broadcasts of large events over internet, a thing that can be used for many purposes. And not to forget the scientific aims, to test the number of hypotheses I had concerning culture complexity, scope of locally available networks, resources, competences, and under what conditions these can be located and activated. It was from the beginning clear to me that to realize the project, I would have to recruit a large number of islanders with high and specialized competencies of very different kinds. They would be musicians, composers, researchers, bell ringers, radio producers, technical engineers, IT specialists, organizers, journalists, media people, and so on. I also obviously needed skills in mapping and locating and activating such resources, as well as competence to operate within a number of circles and networks and institutions, and that is not an easy thing, such as the Church of Sweden, the art world, the national and regional radio circles, musicians, the world of IT technicians, and not least the circles controlling financial support to such wild ideas. And all of these competencies and resources I decided I would have to find here in Gotland. Only if I couldn't find them what I needed, I would involve mainlanders. So now, the idea, I just close this down for some seconds now and go on from here. The idea came up in conversation with a close friend of mine. She's a journalist and writer and nationally renowned radio producer. And she had been working with a book on Gotland's medieval churches. And she recalled that she had stumbled on a book that listed all the bells in the island. And then with that, I turned to a technician at Swedish Radio in Gotland and that I vaguely knew from before and asked him if a concert with all these church bells would be conceivable. He smiled and said, yes, perhaps. And then he said, but some of the technology you would need has not yet to be developed. And it turned out that he, although stationed in Visby, now was working for the National Swedish Radio's Department for Advanced Technology and development of advanced technology. And he said that that what I needed could be done, and that he, in fact, had been tossing around similar ideas in the National Radio Company for some years, but with no response. Then he leaned back and said, what we need is to set up a production, and to do that, we need a producer that could find the money for it. In that very moment, my friend, the radio producer, turned up in the room, and then we both nodded and said, yes, and here she comes. So the production was set. So among the next steps was to bring together the radio technicians with experts on telecom technology at Ericsson to find out if the idea to broadcast by smartphones was at all plausible. And the answer was yes, in principle, but they didn't know if the necessary technology was available. While the broadcasting specialists tried to figure these things out, I set up a meeting with the bishop to hear in Visby to hear his opinion about the project, considering the complicated organization of Swedish church. That was important, of course, because they are the owner of the church. And then the answer was positive. Then I contacted the musical director in the cathedral in Visby, who was a well-known composer, and he agreed to compose part of the musical score. And I realized that in order to win financial support I needed, I had to turn to national funds. And then I realized that there could be difficulties to gain the confidence of these national circles in Stockholm, confidence of Stockholm-based funding institutions for a project that would be done in Gotland. So I decided to make an exception from the rule that all participants had to be islanders, and called an old friend, which is a professor in composition in the Royal Academy of Music in Stockholm, and actually one of Sweden's most prominent composers. She immediately accepted the challenge to create new music for this unknown, really huge instrument. Actually, the sound of which no one of us ever heard, actually nobody ever heard before. And the function and the effects, we had very vague ideas about it. We have even troubles to imagine the effects of such a performance. And with all this, I applied for funding. And in spring 2011, I got it. So we recruited more than 100 ringers, more than 150 volunteers. We composed a 3-part piece for the largest instrument hitherto heard of, and set up homepages, Facebook groups, penetrated national radio and television, and things like that. And we created a technical framework with broadcaster apps, IceCast servers, controlling systems to be able to use smartphones to broadcast from the different places. And all active participants were in fact islanders. The concert became a great success. Everything worked out fine. The reception was amazingly positive, to say the least. The concert was sold to 10 countries, covering about 5 to 10 million listeners. And the year after, we were awarded with Prix Italia, which is the radio world's finest prize, of course. So what is there now to learn from a project like this about culture production in Gotland, about island culture and islandness? Well, first of all, that most, if not all, of the propositions and assumptions I had stood the test. That is why I think. All the resources and competences except one that I needed were actually available in the island, and they were also easily located and activated. The bishop, the composers, the heads of the Swedish radio, the ringers, the volunteers, the computer specialist, media, all these were just one step away. Even answers to the most complicated and specific questions were in general a telephone call away. Here's just a short example. From maps of internet connections, we learned that there was no available mobile or internet connection outside one of the churches in the middle of the island. We were 3 persons in a meeting room trying to figure out what to do, and then one said, I know a guy that lives just nearby that church, and I recognized the name as an amateur violinist and a painter, which is a friend of my son's. And the third one said, yeah, you're right. I think I have his phone number here. Then the first person said, okay, let's call him. And we called him, and when he answered, he said, oh, hi, I was just thinking about calling you to ask if I could be part of your Bell project. Of course, you can use my Wi-Fi connection. So from noting that we had a problem, to locating a possible solution, and to activate it and have a yes, it took around 2 minutes. So I think this is a sort of image of what I'm talking about. So when I asked persons I located how they thought I had found them, they had no difficulty to figure it out. What this points to is that much of the knowledge about the social networks is not only widely distributed, but also that is rather symmetrically distributed. So this is intersubjectivity at its best. Not only do I know who knows, but the persons who know that also know that I know and how I know it. And they know also how they also know how I would know that. So the result is intersubjectivity. And the result is a certain transparency, which points to open networks and a basis accessibility and availability of the resources. So there is not much need for specialized human search engines to locate a needed competence or resource. It's basically for everyone to do that. Now, the idea that everybody knows everybody on an island is certainly not true. during the project, I met many that I never had met before. And still, most, if not all, involved belong to one or more island networks. So that's also in this project, the centuries-old border between islanders, networks of islanders, and people from away, visitors, incomers, was activated and reproduced. So it seems that it's at least some truth in the saying among newcomers that it may take years to get into the community or into society. Yes, that is, to be accepted as a member of a community and to be incorporated into a network, it may take years. Perhaps you could say that the island interface is close to the outside while it's open to the inside. It's more like a Macintosh or an Apple phenomenon, more like an IBM thing. That you need to log in and have to be able to become a member. And membership, of course, comes with family and family relations, and also through hard work, long time, and a certain commitment to the island, to island life and culture. So now the scope and importance of what I refer to as multitasking or maybe versatility is perhaps larger than I first realized. The people I engaged, they were combining the most varied of professions. One was a pilot, hotel manager, and a musician. Another, a nationally famed cook, teacher, singer, and renovator of the old houses. And because of being active in so many several and different professional circles, their networks became large and complex. Also important is that these networks often overlapped, which meant that you regularly could count on encountering specific individuals in several different positions and roles. In other terms, your face would be known from different sites or different positions normally. Another important factor for the project was reciprocity. Certain services were available to me and to the project because people found it likely that they would be able to ask for services in return later on, or maybe that they were in fact actually paying back already what they had for services they had got earlier. And another finding is the importance of what could be termed, maybe ethnicity would be a good term. I and myself and a fair number of the most active in this project were born and bred in the island. We speak the island dialect. This opened doors which for others may have been closed or stayed closed actually also. But to be an islander in Gotland is not only a question of where you were born and how you speak. It's also a question of being possible to be inscribed and located in the island's extensive genealogical maps or networks. These are maps that are constantly worked out orally as narratives. An almost obligatory introduction to any conversation before getting to the point, of course, is that you should have to sort out who the involved persons are, where from they are, to whom they are married, if you are anyway related, and then you could go on to the, to the basic fact. Anyway, or is it the other way around? Is it that these narratives, the basic of narratives is to do that mapping, perhaps? Well, these discussions, when the social terrain is actively and purposely mapped, serve much of the same purpose as the famous songer, the famous bards or narrators from West Africa, storytellers, and they are oral historians that called Nyali or Griot in West Africa, who map actually in their songs the social terrain of history. And we have them in islands also here. And last but not least, what the project underline is the close interaction between the two meanings of culture. First, culture as a collective system, and then culture as art. And between the two meanings of island as a physical place in the real world, if you want, and the island as representations or as images of the mind. What the project draw on and alluded to were a number of old, well-established and widely distributed ideas about the island's islandness, its remoteness, its distinctiveness, Gotland as endemic and archaic, a place in the past, a magical medieval place, almost abroad, as they say it. We're almost abroad. I like that, almost abroad. It's a culture place well suited for artists, a place where community and kinship runs deep and wide. These are the ideas that fed the project and gave us the money. But what the project also aspired to do, and the effect of it all, was to actively challenge and perhaps undermine some of these ideas. So now, to end here a little bit, what did we learn? First, of course, that also small places can actually indeed have a big voice. And let me now briefly repeat a little bit what I concluded again and come back to some of the principles, just to underline them a little bit further. First, about reciprocity. A condition for achieving and maintaining a full social life is sufficient economic resources. It's fairly clear. You need money. In a society with few assets, the opportunities for supplying many alternatives and different ways of life are generally few. So the chronic lack of money in Gotland society has many consequences. One is that many accounts are regulated without money, as straightforward favors or through exchanges of labor. So reciprocity then becomes an important cultural norm in the island, which leads to extensive exchange of resources and to strong local networks. And this is not least true when it comes to cultural production. There are many artists on the island, and many of them perform for low or no pay, but they are able to instead receive other types of services or goods for little pay. So reciprocity as a cultural norm reinforces the boundary between the island and the mainland, since you often have to pay people from abroad, from away, with ready money. And the level of formal, this is stopped now. There we are. The level of formal education on the island is generally low, but the number of specialists is nevertheless high, not least when it comes to cultural production. The island seems to exert a powerful attraction on expressive specialists in many areas. And these specialists, the collective competence of these specialists is both high and broad. They are intellectuals, politicians, craftsmen, artists, musicians. It's likely that there are more such specialists in Gotland in relation to population size than anywhere else in Sweden. There are quite large networks of expressive specialists of different kinds across the island that are often easy to identify, to contact, and to activate. Also, the common islander is often culturally active. There are more choirs, sport clubs, cultural associations, etc. per capita than in any other region in Sweden. So a mark of Highland culture is high quality and more practitioners per capita than elsewhere in Sweden. But at the same time, it's often very difficult to convince islanders that this is the case. And this is partly the result of everyday practice of marginalization, which has created a deeply rooted perception of always lagging behind, that whatever comes from the mainland, from far away, and particularly the mainland, of course, is a priori better and classier. Now, a characteristic feature of island culture is versatility or multitasking. Gotland seems to attract people of many and diverse talents and repel highly specialized people in some narrow fields. A survival strategy for island culture as a whole is breadth. Resources and competence come wide, but not necessarily deep. You will find people living from combinations of all kinds of professions. Such multitasking is actually a constant in the conditions for survival on the island since as far back as we can see. So versatility vastly increases the total available competences and resources and promotes rich networks. Also, the competences and resources become relatively easily mobilized, especially since many islanders do not immediately demand money for what they do. This means that the entrance thresholds are often low for new ideas and projects. And a striking feature is surveyability, or maybe transparency if you like. A highly valued culture practice, well developed in many of the islands I have studied on, is to actively and constantly scan the social landscape, to take interest not only in what's going on in the island, but also who did what and how they are related. And also newcomers tend to pick up this culture practice to the effect that many on the island believe that they have a rather precise overall picture of the island's social life, especially, of course, in their own area of interest or activity, and that they therefore can easily locate and get in contact with and activate the resources and competencies they need. Of course, the backside of this practice is that the constant scanning regularly leaves out certain dark spots, which makes specific corners of island social life not only neglected, but almost totally invisible. So if you're being positioned in such a dark corner, you're basically out. Yet another striking feature is overlap. What I call overlap is that same people interact as professionals in offices, as customers in grocery shops, as parents in daycares and schools, and then go to meet as neighbors in pubs, choirs, sport associations, and so on, which makes people visible and accessible to each other in many different roles. And this fosters a culture practice of recognition from actively seeking eye contact and greeting each other in streets, the common small talk about weather, family, and work. And this serves as a scanning device to secure the necessary overview over island social life. And taken together, versatility, surveyability, and overlap are factors that together make the local structure strong by forging many bonds between people, which together become strong bonds. And as I already underlined, this is also true of many newcomers to the island, but at first to a lesser degree. And as a consequence, people tend to become visible as individuals rather than as group members. It is their competence, interest, style, or taste that is in focus more than their professions, maybe, or where they come from, or culture, or whatever the kind of background they have. Now, as a finale, let me just stop this and go back to picture and end this by saying that most of these aspects of island culture and of islandness are well known from a large number of studies in anthropology, ethnology, sociology, studies of local culture, studies of villages, small town life, places that actually may or may not be surrounded by water. After all, islands may not be that different, or could it be the other way around? You could also argue that many other kinds of places are islanded by being inscribed in a discourse that separates the local and regional from the national, that separates small places from larger cities, towns from countrysides, centers from peripheries. An important aspect of the notion of island and of islandness is precisely a widely distributed discourse about marginalized remote places, bounded, archaic, endemic, a discourse that comes with the capacity to produce what it names and along with small towns and villages, islands tend to be among those places that can easily be produced as remote, small, and local, as peripheral and marginal. In islands, this seems to be especially amplified and to reach a wider magnitude, maybe because of the water. And that makes islands certainly very good places to study the mechanisms that produce the remoteness, marginality, and peripherality that we have come to know as islands and islandness. So this is my take on thinking with islands, which makes thinking with islands also thinking about the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ove. Very thought-provoking indeed, and that concept of thinking with islands, I like that very, very much. It puts us at the center of things. So yeah, that was magnificent. Lots of really interesting themes to pick up, and we have a couple of questions now in the chat, and some comments as well. There you go, from Laurie. Best talk I've ever heard of on islandness. So there you go.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you very much.
Definitely wouldn't disagree. That was really fascinating. So if you've got the chat there, you'll see that Kate has got a question there for you. I don't know if you can read it yourself or whether I'm reading it.
Yes, I'll have to scan. I have to. Let me see now. Which is the first? Yes, Kate here. Yes. And this is a good question. Did I have to sort of format the ideas or format the practice to put it bluntly? Yes, to get the money, I needed to format the message to fit into some expectations of that I knew that I thought was needed in the national fund in Stockholm. I know these people quite well, actually, and so I addressed them, and then in Swedish you would say "bre på," which is means like you would butter is on, like I don't know if the English word here. You would put more butter to it, and things like that. So yes, it's very important not to get the money, but when we got the money, which was the only external support we needed. When we actually got the money, no questions were asked, and then were only applauds. So it's really difficult. These ideas I talked about, they are very strong, and actually they are so foundational that most people do believe they are real. So while we have learned about ideas about women, about people that our foundational ideas about gender, about age, about people with color, that they are actually ideas. We have not still learned that the ideas about islands are still ideas. People do take them as real, and that is a problem for most of us.
Yes, indeed. And do you think that the big project had an impact in outside of Gotland, sort of challenging these ideas, well, both inside and outside Gotland? Has there been a sort of impact and people started to think about things in a slightly different way?
Yes. We had an amazing number of reactions. Amazing. One important part of the reactions were about tears, crying, and I don't know where they were crying because it sounded terrible, or they were happy, or so, I don't know, but it raised emotions of we could never have thought about that. Even my wife, she was so fed up with the project, as you could imagine. We're living it, but with it, and for 2 years and so on. Even she cried because of it has to do, I think, with the church bells, with the choice of the performance, the instrument. So the church bells has an agency of itself in its own. So that's part of it. But the reactions were amazing. We got emails and letters and calls from all over Europe, and it was about some existential feeling, not like, oh, I want to go there, nice place, not that kind, but some other kind of more existential being in the world phenomenon that there was. So there were many thousands of reactions. And it was just hilarious.
Yeah, I wish I'd been able to experience it myself. So is it
But
available?
you can hear it actually. Yes, and I will, while it's going on, I just was because it's on the. I left it by. Let me see now. Here you are. Write that down. You can go there, and there is we have got the. Actually, the recording is owned by their Swedish radio company, but they have decided to let us to have it on this web page, so you can listen to the recording.
Thank you very much.
And you can also, if you listen to it, and when you listen to it, I would like you to think about the question: what is music? Because sometimes the last part of this composition, in the very last moments, I think would be the soundtrack to a film that could be called Armageddon, or the end of the world, because we had all those bells ring at the same time. An amazing sound. Play it on really high volume, and it will make some. It will be fantastic.
I'll do that. I'll frighten the dog.
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent. So there's another couple of questions here. There's a question from Laurie.
Let me see. Yes. It is true that I have been, as Laurie knows, I spent some months in Prince Edward Island, and then Åland, Saaremaa, Gotland are among the other islands I've been to and talked to islanders everywhere. It seems that artists like islands for some reason, artists and creative people. And the question is why, of course. Why is that? My son has a good answer. He's a very good guitarist, in traditional music guitarist and so on. And he says that if you're a musician, you are basically unemployed. And if you're unemployed, you can as well be it in a good place, in a nice place. So so he has this other take on it. And I think that is a very good answer, actually, that it's difficult, maybe for some, it's difficult to live as an artist in big cities. Some of these people that I talk to here tend to say that. And also, I think an other type of answer, or a good answer too, is that what they need, they can find for little money. And they can activate, as I did, their resources. So they can actually, many of them can actually do what they set out to do. And they can also know from, or at least be a little bit sure about that they actually can do that, because they would know that they can do it, which makes the option to go about it easier. In bigger towns, you can find that, oh shit, this is too difficult, I don't know if I can do that, and that's a hinder. But here, you can actually figure it out and go about it. So there are many reasons, but it seems true, to at least to some extent. I think for Shetland also, that many people are creative and active in artists, in art and music. And what about Lewis? Perhaps in Lewis also, and in different places. Yes. Sometimes we wonder why the mainland. Yes. Of course, this is which is, I think, one of the big problems of island life is that what I prefer to call marginalization. Marginalization is a phenomenon, or something that is becomes inscribed on our bodies. It's not a structural feature. It is a very physically felt. It is sort of written on our bodies. The marginalization comes with that. It comes with an underdog position. You are becoming marginalized, and you know that when you think that you are not good enough. And we are taught from here, at least. This has changed a little bit, changed somewhat. But when I was young, we were taught that we have to go. Otherwise, we are not anybody to count on. And then if you come back, you're a double winner, because the islanders who stayed, they say, oh, he went away, he made career, and he came back. Wow. And so this is a sort of a double win in it. And then, but this idea of being marginalized is not a thing on the mind only. It's a very physical thing, I would say, and a physical and on an everyday basis. That knowing that you're always one of the things that comes with marginalization is that that we have to live here on the island, with the notion that we have an island culture, or that this island is the place where I live, and that there is another place called Stockholm, which governs it all. But in Stockholm, you can live your whole life without giving a shit on places like Gotland and everything. So this double idea that there are different places, and not only Stockholm, of course, there are Londons and New Yorks and whatever towns and big places. And this double idea is not so easily found in the big cities. So in the big cities, it's more like they're circumscribed in a certain way, where we know that when we know from a very profound knowledge that the world is divided, at least two, we have our local and there's something else out there. And there is a totally different position when you live in a big city. So this is also part of the marginalization story. Let's see now, are there more questions? Somebody?
There are one or two other ones there.
Yeah, I'm
looking. To go now over because I've got to run another session for MRes students, creative practitioners across the islands of Scotland. But I'll pass you over to Frank, who I've now made the host, and it was fabulous to see you again, and we'll speak soon.
Okay, goodbye, Andrew. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Let's stick to one of these questions. I think that Laurie says that find that the notion of islandness is foreign to islanders. They perform islandness, but they don't know they're doing it. That is, I think, very true. I was going to start by saying I deleted that, but one of the things I certainly stumbled over when doing island research is that, oh shit, I'm an islander. I never thought about that. I never thought about, what that could be. I just discovered it through doing island studies, that I must be one of those I'm talking about here. And my wife also, we said, so it's true. Islandness it's not an emic position. It's not an emic idea. It's an analytical thing from above. Although what we describe as islandness, these things that I talked about, versatility, transparency, I think these can be easily, they are in the emic repertoire. Maybe not the expressions themselves, but the ideas behind them.
One of the fascinating things that I saw there was I wrote a book recently, published last year, and the big bookshops, I've noticed, find it very hard to classify this, because it's about this small island village and all the different aspects. And so sometimes you see it in the history section, and sometimes it's in the nature writing section, and sometimes it's in travel, and they find it hard to understand because you're looking at things in its totality. And I wonder, because we naturally assume that whole world view of the island, I wonder if we need to be much more active in challenging that small world view, that pejorative language that actually is, if we talked about people from different racial backgrounds in the same way that people talked about islands, then we would be up in jail for inciting discrimination and separation and so on. So I think we have to be much more active in challenging these things, perhaps. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We had a case here, actually, when the Swedish National Heritage Board, which is the oldest heritage board of this kind in the world, the first, and very prestigious, and it was decided that they were to move to Visby. Of course, the CEO of that organization, she became mad or frantic. She was just, no, we can't go there. And then she, came up with all those arguments for not going there, and exactly what a student of ours, she collected them and presented this and analyzed this, her arguments, and what she said and what came up is that if it had been Sami people, if it had been Jews or whatever, she would go to jail. This is absolutely not possible to say some things, but for Gotlanders, it was all okay. Nobody reacted. So it is a very common thing, I think, that people do these kind of things. We had a earlier party leader for the right-wing party in Sweden came up with the idea that people outside of big cities are stupid. That's why they are still living there. So I mean, that's wow.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's a part of this everyday practice of marginalization that goes on everywhere, of course.
Yeah.
Let me see. From Jonathan Harold.
Yeah.
Let me. Yes. I think that this is a good idea to study history, and if you look back in history, you would say that this use that I try to introduce here, the use of island as a entity that is not necessarily governed by water, surrounded by water. This is an old one. In the Romans used Isola for all kinds of things, quarters in Rome, cities, whatever. They used it and islanded them differently. And also, if you go on the totally other direction and look at things like Star Trek or Star Wars, you would find planets positioned as islands. And if you look at them as islands, what do you find? Everyone on the planet is the same race, and they have just one culture on the island. And this culture is often lagging behind. They might be technically, like in the film Avatar, if you remember, they might be in some way nice or good or whatever, but they're lagging behind in comparison with humans, the humanoid or the humans. So the whole space is now islanded. So this verb, I think, is very good because it makes us see the powers that are at work.
Yeah.
And that is not only about places that is surrounded by water.
It was interesting. I didn't stay overnight in Glasgow until well into till I was 30 something, and my only way to navigate around Glasgow was to go on the underground train and come up in the various stations. And so my map of Glasgow was at these different islands connections, and I didn't realize they were connected on the same street or the same road. And my only way to get from one to the other was to go back to the underground and up in the next station. And it was a big discovery when I realized that I could just walk half a mile along the road and I ended up in the next island. It's a strange concept.
Yeah. Yes. Now, so I want to end this all. I think that in my view, there would be a good thing. What island research can help us, island studies can help us do, is to discover these kind of phenomena or to get to know them, and also work with them when we find them activated, like the marginalizing practices. And it would be the same as in Me Too. Maybe we could sometime do something like in the Me Too movement, or in other as claiming a bit more space, claiming a bit more, bit less marginalized place, and we could do that by raising voice. That was the whole idea, raising the voice.
Well, that was an absolutely wonderful seminar. Thank you very much for that. There is so much that you've covered. We could go on talking for hours and hours, and there are more questions, I'm sure, both this in chat and in email afterwards. Perhaps we might get you back again and sometime in the future to look at some other aspects of this in more detail. But for the moment, thank you very much for that. That was a very stimulating hour or so that we spent there. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all participants for taking part of this and listening. So here from snowy, stormy Gotland, eastern Gotland, where I'm now, I say hello and goodbye to you all.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Take care, everyone. Bye just now.